Zen at the Sharp End. Welcome to the podcast about how to turn difficult people and relationships into your best teachers. I'm Mark Westmackett, a Zen Buddhist teacher, mindfulness teacher, and ex-professional astronomer. This is a podcast to go along with my book, Zen and the Art of Dealing with Difficult People. In each episode, we'll be exploring different varieties of people, relationships, and situations that we find irritating, difficult, or painful. Together with a number of Zen friends, I'll be discussing how the practices of Buddhism and mindfulness can help us see our difficult people as troublesome Buddhas, our greatest teachers. This podcast is sponsored by Zen Minded. If you get a chance, check them out at www.zenminded.uk. You'll find a curated selection of Japanese homeware and incense, a perfect match to your meditation practice. We're also sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp offers convenient and affordable therapy online. In my opinion, meditation and psychotherapy both offer valuable avenues for exploring our suffering, habits, and stuck areas. A while back I spent 3.5 years meeting twice a week with a psychotherapist when things had become acute, and it felt like the help he gave me was really transformational, especially when supported by my regular meditation practice. If you're interested, they've extended an offer of 10% off your first month of therapy at betterhelp.com/zen at the sharp end. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/zen at the sharp end. Spencer Sherman is the author of The Cure for Money Madness and founder of a successful, values-driven financial consulting firm. Inspired by a brush with death in his 20s and a realization that he valued money higher than his own life, he began a journey into meditation, which brought him face to face with that extremely troublesome Buddha of money, identity, and wealth. Now based in California, Spencer devotes much of his time to sharing his mindfulness-based approach to money through his Fearless Finance program. In this episode, Spencer begins by talking openly about his experiences of certain difficult people at work, what he's discovered about his habitual ways of dealing with them, and how he's been able to step out of his habitual responses in order to find a new sense of freedom. With honesty and humour, he also discusses his long journey of coming to understand his own relationship with money, and laments how the discussion of this central topic is so taboo in our society and leads so many to so much suffering. He discusses his work with those facing the pain of bankruptcy or major financial loss, and how he's found so many of these people so deeply identified with their financial situation, believing that net worth equals self-worth. In exploring these topics, we talk about how encountering difficult people and facing our finances equally bring us face to face with impermanence and the realization that there's really nothing to hold on to, and hence towards real freedom. Oh, welcome, Spencer, and thanks for joining us today on the podcast and at the Sharp End.
Great to be here, Mark. I'm excited, even though we're talking about difficult conversations, difficult people. It's actually one of my favorite topics. So very excited to be here.
Perhaps it would be good to start off with just talk a little bit about your background and what brought you to practice and Buddhism, and also your such a fascinating area that you work with in looking at people's finances and money.
Yeah. So what brought me to Buddhism really was, I think like for many of us, it was suffering. It was a fire that I had a panic attack. There was a fire in an office building where I was working, and I had a panic attack because my laptop was in that building. And my mind was saying, your laptop is worth more than your life. Go into that building and rescue your laptop. And I convinced a fire marshal to let me in to the building just as they were putting out the fire. There was risk of electrocution, asbestos, not to mention smoke and everything else. And so I, did that, and later that day had this reckoning with what was the, most intense suffering of my life, I think the biggest shakeup of how I saw myself, my identity at
Mm,
that time, of this person who was on this relentless drive to work and work and work more to make more and more money.
mm,
And that, it's like I wasn't really in recognition of this being. And it was a lightning rod for me to take on some strong medicine. And I had some inkling about meditation practice.
right.
And so the thought that came to me was do a 10-day silent meditation retreat.
Mm,
Was
mm,
that felt like the medicine I needed it. And I think I had this faith that if nothing else, 10 days of silence could produce some very fertile ground for this mind that was just full of weeds, you might say, at that point.
mm, yeah, yeah. So like a strong event needs some kind of strong medicine, and a 10-day
Yes.
retreat is quite a strong piece of medicine, right?
Yes.
Mm,
Yes. I mean, I was scared of doing a 10-day silent meditation retreat in my early 20s, but I knew that I had to do something, and I knew I had to kind of figure out what propelled me to disregard my life
mm,
for that laptop.
mm, mm. Yeah, gosh, yeah. And then how did it go?
Yeah. So what came to be is that I started to recognize some of the beliefs that were had been circulating in my mind, but didn't really recognize them clearly until that retreat. And the one I think that really stood out was that money is more important than anything. The material world is more important than anything.
Mm,
And here I am in this meditation retreat, sort of the opposite in some ways of the material world. It was a very simple place, very simple food, very simple room. I had nothing with me. And I'm feeling this sense of fullness. I'm not feeling a sense of lack. So it was a complete contradiction to the way I was raised, all so much of my conditioning.
mm.
And I think that was the beginning of the end of that, of the of how strongly I held that belief. I like to say that that belief has loosened its grip on me rather than it's just completely vanished.
Right.
It does
Yeah.
peek out and look at me at times
Okay.
and see if it can tantalize me. It's sort of like, are you going to play with this belief? Are you going to, can we tempt you?
Mm,
Um, and I
yeah.
have to find that
Mm,
inner compass within myself, that strength within to say,
mm.
no, there's something much more satisfying right here than
So,
going
so on the
after
retreat,
more in the material world. Yeah.
right? Sorry. Yeah. 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 I mean, on the retreat, was there teachings around how to deal with that kind of stuff, or how to inquire into that kind of stuff, or did it just simply arise as you were sitting in the silence?
Well, I got it from the simplicity of the place that I was feeling. I actually started building up so much energy. I mean, it was the opposite. I thought a silent meditation retreat was going to be boring.
Mm,
And it is sometimes, I think for all of us, there can be those moments. But what came up for me on that first retreat, I think the novelty of it is so much energy got built up. And one might say maybe it got built up because I was throwing away a lot of energy. I was losing energy through so many random thoughts, through pursuing things that were not going to bring me lasting happiness. And it was a Vipassana retreat. And so, I mean, it was a simple, I mean, the instructions were set very simple about being aware of what's arising and seeing the impermanence of everything. And I think through that, I needed to see the impermanence of that laptop, and the impermanence of my life,
your life, right?
and the
Yeah.
recognition of the relative values of these things.
Mm,
And all of that became much more clear to me during that silent retreat, during those practices of that alternating between sitting and walking practices during those 10 days. A lot got illuminated.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, and so how has things gone since then?
Yeah, and I think the other thing that I got to be with is in Vipassana is learning how to be with the pain, the anxiety that I grew up with that led to that, like the moments leading up to that panic attack there was all this anxiety that started snowballing into a panic attack. And the mindfulness Vipassana practice was this great way of being with, shining a light of awareness on those sensations of anxiety and watching them change. So that was just very informative,
Mm.
transformative to be able to do that. It's such a simple practice. And, as I describe it, it sounds like really like nothing or boring, or like, how can just being with sensations be transformative? But for those of us who have done that, it is, because you befriend those ugly sensations, feelings, and in the befriending of them, they lose their power.
So I think that touches on a very
Yeah.
important core sort of um, principle for working with difficulty, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like you start to befriend things that arise that are uncomfortable and painful and cause suffering. But I think in my experience, it takes some level of courage or
Yeah.
willpower or intention to even get to that point of being willing to look at that stuff, right?
Yes. Yes. And I think that's why, the Buddhism talks about suffering for a reason, is that suffering is an incredible motivator. And that day was such a upside down day, that it
Mm,
was so clear that I I needed to start to cultivate some courage to look at my life, to look at the thought patterns in my life, and Buddhist practice, meditation practice, I think is so designed to work with
mm,
difficult feelings, emotions, people. I mean, no wonder why you have this podcast, Mark. It's the perfect podcast because Buddhist principles are just fold in so well to working with difficulty in our lives.
Well, it's just the human condition, isn't it? I mean, like
Yes.
you put
Yes.
a group of humans together, and there's going to be difficulty, and some people do get on better than others. That's the way, way we are.
Yes. Yes.
Mm, mm. So I wonder, have there been some moments like after that when you're starting to engage with practice and sort of deal with the stuff that's been arising, where you've encountered people that have been particularly difficult, and sort of that has helped shine different lights or other angles?
Yeah, so I noticed that that my tendency, I mean, we talk about, in psychology, they, or I guess in Buddhism, there's the idea that when there's, I mean, yeah, in Buddhism, there's, you know, greed, aversion, delusion,
Mm,
that we tend to have one of those responses when some difficulty comes up. We might want to fight, we might want to flee, or we might just go into sort of a freeze mode, paralysis mode, which is, sort of akin to delusion.
mm, mm.
And, I'm thinking about this one difficult person. For me, I don't think there's such a thing as a difficult person. I think it's in the wiring or in the relationship with a person that we find difficulty.
That's it. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I
and
often say it's not the problem is not in the other person. The problem is in
yes,
the space between,
yes,
in the
exactly.
relationship, isn't it?
And
Mm.
mostly here, I would say.
Within ourselves. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about this one person at work. And so my reaction to him was to often flee. And flee to me, for me, took the form of minimizing my time with this person and not speaking up when I wanted to say something, not wanting to engage because it was so terrifying. And yet, with this person in particular, there was an incredible opportunity that it took me a while to really discern
Mm,
that he was, in fact, a teacher of mine. He was, a living Buddha
mm,
inviting me to speak up when I feel like there's no chance my words are going to get heard.
mm,
uh, that this terror that I felt was really something that was very familiar to me, and he triggered it.
Mm.
His demeanor, maybe we can say it, maybe it reminded me of my father or something, but it was
Mm.
such a strong sort of kind of my way or the highway kind of personality that in my perception, that I recoiled from it.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to see, and eventually I did see that if I can start to play in the sandbox with this person, if I can start to take, muster up the courage to take some risks with this person, it may not go well. I may not get anything,
Mm.
but what
Mm.
I will achieve is this ability to feel a sense of freedom that regardless of the outcome, I can say what I need to say.
Mm. Mm.
And that
So I
was a
wonder if
huge
that,
thing.
so
Yeah.
we could perhaps just kind of break that a little bit down. I mean, so there's the process of s- experiencing this person as difficult and
Yes.
experiencing, maybe we don't even experience it, maybe it's very unconscious sometimes, we
Yeah.
react the way we do because that's our conditioning, and then we start to dawn on us, oh my gosh, that's what I'm doing, and every time that person's like that, that's my response. And then there's a kind of gradual, like, awareness or increasing awareness about my habitual responses. So was there a process that happened there? I mean, was it practice that was going along parallel, or what kind of precipitated the growth in your awareness, do you think?
It was recognizing, I think, again, it was suffering, is that I was feeling so dismissed by this person. I was feeling so disrespected by this person. And I know that so much of this is coming from, like, as you said, the space between us, or it's coming from my own projections. It's coming from my own history. And, that I recognize from that I've had enough practice, particularly Buddhist practice, to know that the problem is not over there,
Hmm.
that it's here, and he's just a representative of many,
Exactly.
many difficult people that I'm going to have in my life, or people I experience as difficult. And that if I can open to this situation, there's can be tremendous healing for me, uh, in my ability to to assert myself instead of recoiling from a situation like this, and only sharing my viewpoints when they're wanted or they're liked. And what about sharing a viewpoint when the other person might say, "I don't think that has any value, what you just said."
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, that that it was like this way in which I started discounting myself, and I started noticing it, this discounting of myself every time I was with him, and this putting him above me.
Hmm.
And we know that that's a fundamental error whenever we start to do that, put anyone above us or below us,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
it's creating this separation. There is no above and below. And that all led me to start to share much more openly with him. And I actually did confess to him that I was having a hard time sharing my truth with him.
Hmm.
And he said to me, he kind of owned it. He says, "I know I have a tough exterior. And I
Hmm.
just want to tell you that you will not lose me no matter what you say. You will,
So
that I will not abandon you no matter what you say to
yeah,
me."
yeah.
So he kind of also gave me permission.
That's absolutely fascinating, because
Yeah.
when we take that courageous step
Mhm.
towards someone that we find difficult, and actually not only do we start behaving differently, but then we actually approach them and speak out the difficulty that we're having. Often I've, for myself and also speaking to other people, there's a sense of drawing alongside and opening up from the other person, like, and then that really changes the relationship hugely, doesn't it?
Yes,
Mm.
yes, yes. I mean, it did. And that's when, compassion turned on, because I never felt compassion for him. How do you feel compassion for a sort of bully kind of
Mm.
put a person?
Mm.
I was using air quotes there. But, because again, I don't think there is such a thing as a bully. It's my perception. It's in someone might act as a bully. But I started feeling this immense compassion for all of his conditioning that led
Mm.
to this harder shell, this protective shell. And underneath that is as much fear as I have in my own body. We just show it differently.
Yeah.
He shows it more by fighting. That's how he keeps danger away. And I keep it away by fleeing, perhaps, is my MO.
Your sort of habitual conditioned.
Yes, my habitual conditioning. Yes, exactly. And the other thing that came in from Buddhism is, I love, some of these ideas are just so fabulous. Like the idea of beginner's mind, such a beautiful idea that of seeing things with fresh eyes, seeing even the most familiar people in our lives, our best friends, our spouses, and especially our coworkers, with this beginner's mind each time you're with them. So you're not projecting from the past, and that giving this person an opportunity to be a new person today, just like you, because they are. And that was very helpful in my interactions with him. Like, what would I say to him if I just met him today and I knew nothing about the past was gone? What would I say? And because I felt, this is a situation where I felt like I was hurting the company. I was hurting myself by not sharing my points of view. Maybe there's some times in life when you don't want to share your points of view. It's like literally physically a dangerous situation. So I'm not saying that one should do that, but there are many situations where we're actually causing more harm by not sharing our points of view.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned the word healing.
Yeah.
So what kind of healing happened, or what was the sort of outcome? Do you think, or down the line, how do things change?
Yeah. So, I think with that beginner's mind practice that I did with him helped me cultivate much more of a beginner's mind in general. I think we start to do that more and more, like later in life. We wake up to the possibility that we have all this conditioning and that we're all changing. We see that from Buddhist practice, and to give people that.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily later in life. I think it's further down the Buddhist path, maybe.
Further down the Buddhist path, right?
We've got more
Right.
water under the meditation bridge. That's it.
Right, exactly. We begin to see that, wow, there's an opportunity here to have a fresh life, that by seeing everything, the flowers, the people in our lives, with the eyes of kind of a newborn, but with the consciousness of an adult, is quite remarkable what can happen from that. So just in that, there was a healing, but I think for me the bigger healing was about me recognizing my authority, my ability to speak out, because I often hold back. Like, if I don't have the perfect answer, I'm that kind of person who won't raise their hand. And if I'm in a board meeting, I sometimes am very shy about sharing. And this sort of helped me kind of move the needle a little bit. So I haven't gone all the way to the other side. I don't necessarily want to, but I felt like I was overly withholding,
Yeah.
overly, not withholding from a place of fear. So there was all this fear that was directing my life, and that was part of the healing, was diffusing a lot of this fear that I was carrying that kept me from showing up at work with and sharing the insights from decades of experience that I had. I was often sometimes putting somebody with much less experience way above me, just because they were speaking things with a certain tonality of absolute know-it-all confidence.
Authority or whatever. Yeah, exactly. So it's a very strong habit pattern, isn't it? I mean, in my book, I talk about it in terms of, like, there's an aversion avoidance and then an aversion anger pattern.
Yes.
And both of them are forms of aversion, but they're just
Yes.
expressed in a different way. And perhaps the person you were speaking about had that aversion anger. So we feel fear and we express it in terms of anger, and we fight and we push back. and then other people, depending on their
Yeah.
past history and all that stuff, ended up expressing it in terms of withdrawing and
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't say I have totally moved to the place where I get excited when I find someone to be difficult, but I
mm,
think that's a good
mm,
direction for all of us to move towards. That when you're finding someone is difficult, that there's a learning opportunity there. Hopefully a
that's it.
free learning opportunity.
Mm,
But there's like, wow, what you get to work with all kinds of things. Like somebody's cutting the line in front of you at the movie theater, at the queue in the front of the movie theater,
yeah.
and you can say, wow, I get to work with patience. I get to work with ethics. Is that right what that person did? And everything else, can come up, or the mind that's making up all kinds of stories about that person who cut the line
Absolutely.
queue.
Yeah.
Maybe
Mhm.
they cut the queue because they were way in the very front. I don't know. Who knows what happened? How they
Mm,
maybe they saw some friends or something, or the manager told them to get in
yeah.
line there. Who knows? Uh,
Exactly.
so
Exactly.
it's there. Everything is kind of grist for the mill. We start to see, instead of seeing the problem as the person, we see the problem as someone who's giving us an opportunity to have some insights. It's a much more pleasurable way to live one's life, much more fulfilling way, because you're hopefully you'll get to meet some difficult people today, right?
Exactly. Well, I suspect that all of us will meet someone difficult today at
Right.
some
Yeah.
level, right?
So the rest of today, you're either going to meet people who you have an easy time with, or people who you have a more difficult time with, and now you can enjoy them all.
Yeah.
Because the,
Yeah.
the the
I mean,
pleasurable people, maybe you won't learn as much from, but they're just pleasurable. They're just easygoing. They're nice. They compliment everything you say. But then the person who just says that you're full of it, or
well, I
or
think
just
also.
ignores you, you get to work. Well, wow, how can I grow from this opportunity?
Yeah, and those people can be very much combined. Like I'm just thinking right now,
Yeah.
we've got a little one. He's just turned one, and
Wow.
we've got some difficult nights that have been this last week. And my wife, she takes the brunt of it. And there are some moments in the day where things become quite difficult in how we deal with it, the stuff that arises, and with each other, and we kind of, maybe bounce off each other in a slightly awkward way or something, and it's per someone that's the closest and we love each other the most, and yet still we have moments of difficulty that can shine a
Yes.
light on how we
Yeah.
behave and all this stuff.
Yeah. So that's a great point, that even with the people that are the easiest people in our lives, we're going to have difficult moments. If we don't, they're probably not very deep
Mm,
connections.
that's it.
That
That's
intimacy brings on difficult moments. So it's not just certain people, it's everybody who
right.
we're in
Mm,
intimate relationships with of any kind. And it's going to happen. You work on a team for 10 years or 5 years or 2 years. You're going to have difficult moments with some of those team members at work, and you can see those moments as opportunities to heal yourself, to grow, for this other person maybe to heal and grow. And that's why it's great to be in part of an organization or part of a family. It sounds like you and your wife have you both in agreement that difficult moments can be powerfully healing and transformative, rather than just ugly and moments to avoid.
something to avoid, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I was wondering if you perhaps would like to say something about your sort of specialist area dealing with finances, money, and wealth and things. So there's much difficulty and suffering and troublesomeness around that area of a lot of people's lives. So instead of people maybe thinking about those kind of situations we find ourselves
Mm.
in, like how do we apply that same wisdom, in these areas?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question, Mark, because I'll often say that everyone has challenges with their finances, whether they have no money or they have billions of dollars. There's challenges,
Hmm.
and and as you speak, I'm just getting the sense that yes, we can see each of those challenges as rich moments, as wow, what can I learn from this? That I've gone from having lots of money and suddenly I'm bankrupt.
Mm.
I have a negative amount of money. I owe people more than I have. And, again, it's there's a lot of pain often in those moments, but there's also can be tremendous learning. Like you still have your life, you still have your breath, you still
Mm.
have your brain, and so what's possible? You have this ability to start over and begin a whole new trajectory for yourself. So I think that's how we frame things is so important, whether we have that sort of negativity mindset or a more positive mindset, or, sort of in Buddhism might say just a clear minded mindset of seeing that to not create a second arrow that they say
Mm.
in Buddhism, which means that you just lost a bunch of money. That's what happened. You lost a bunch of money. The story is, I'm such a loser.
Uh-huh.
Such a loser. I should not have done that investment. I should not have started that business. I should not have lent money to my friend. I should not have bought, that thing, that I never ended up using. That's the story part, and that's what causes this unnecessary suffering.
There's a second arrow. Mm.
The
Mm.
second arrow, unnecessary trauma, and
Mm.
it's like all that happened is you lost some money. So now what?
Mm.
And what's next? Can we feel the feelings underneath that without going to the story and then listening for the insights that might result? Because it's often in those moments when we do have powerful insights, and there's evidence of this, that some of the greatest enterprises, business ideas were formed at people's moments of great suffering,
Wow. Mm.
right?
Mm.
Because we know that from a spiritual perspective, right? That it's often. I mean, I just heard about this monk who attained a very high level, and it was through a night of intense pain.
Yeah. Mm.
Um,
That's where they say, the suffering is enlightenment. Enlightenment and suffering are one and the same. In our deepest moments of suffering come our greatest insights. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the other thing, you're asking about money is, we have we identify so much with money. I mean, one of the issues, in Buddhism, we talk about letting go of identifying, well, with anything, particularly the self, and yet with money, it becomes this sense of self. We have these words like net worth
Mm.
equals self worth. We start to equate these ideas together, and we think of ourselves a lot in terms of our money. There's so much identification. I'm a rich person, I'm a poor person, I'm a middle income person. So many descriptors of ourselves, and we're missing the fullness of who we are. These are
Mm.
such limiting ways
Right. Right.
to describe ourselves in. So we have this opportunity with money to use it for its goodness. I mean, it's got a lot of good uses. The Buddha talked about it. We can be incredibly generous with it, and generosity is a form of letting go, which
Mm.
letting go leads to enlightenment. So, use money for, ways that serve yourself, your family, serve others, but don't identify with it. It's not who you are. That who you are is so much more vast
Mm.
than any amount of money one could possibly have.
Mm. And for me, I've found turning the light around and shining it on myself a bit. I find if I've got enough money, if I've got money coming into my my account at a higher or similar rate that it's going,
Mm,
then I feel comfortable and happy. If there's less money coming in that's going out, even for just a short amount of time, I feel extremely anxious.
yes.
And that's another one of these patterns and conditioning that I've grown up with.
Absolutely. That our feelings are how we feel about ourselves, and all that starts to be correlated with the rise and fall of our finances. And you see it. I mean, I saw it in my father's face growing up when the stock market would have a bad day. It just colored his
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
And it's like, how, like, why are we letting the impermanence anything color ourselves, instead of recognizing that it is impermanent like everything else, and seeing that and knowing that in our bones, so that we don't. It's understanding the idea of impermanence. Both it's a process of experiencing suffering and um, enlightenment, right? That both are encapsulated in the the principle of impermanence.
Yeah.
It's not fun impermanence, uh, and it also, as we understand that, and really see it clearly, it leads to immense happiness.
Mm. So it's kind of like embracing these people or situations or moments that bring impermanence right up into our face, that you cannot avoid seeing the suffering or the impermanence or the difficulty or the struggles of this moment and this situation, and that is what like creates that transformation and then the healing that we experience afterwards, the shift in the way we deal with things in life. And
Yes, that there's nothing to hold on to, and we start to 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 let go of our identification with so many things, and in that the self starts to dissolve. There's not such a strong sense of self. We see the self as impermanent, also that there is no fixed self. There's a self, but there's no fixed solid self, and in that there's much more potential for joy
mm,
in one's life,
mm,
because
mm,
we're not at the effect of what the markets do, or whether we have more cash coming in or not during the month. We see it all. It doesn't mean we don't take action, but we don't see it as it's no longer determining our overall fundamental well-being or
right,
happiness.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
I think that's an absolutely beautiful message, I suppose, or sentiment to finish on. You know, the idea that these kind of situations that are difficult or financial or otherwise, or people can ultimately bring us joy. That's where we're heading. You know, we're allowing ourselves to
Yeah.
release, let go, and get to the place where we'll find that
Yeah,
joy.
I'm not saying it's easy, but I think what
Mm,
you're pointing to and I'm pointing to is just like difficult people can be great opportunities, teachers for us. I think the difficult moments with our finances can also be very illuminating for ourselves.
mm, mm,
And I've experienced this with people of, like one client got so clear about her difficult financial situation that it led her on towards a spiritual life. She actually moved to India to lower her expenses significantly
mm,
and to live a much more dedicated spiritual life for many years, to kind of let her finances recover. That was her path. It's not everyone's path,
mm, mm,
but I think she got so clear on what was happening, that clarity led to an insight on the right action to take, which for
mm,
her was moving to India
mm.
for 3 years, I think is what she did. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So each of us has our own decisions to make and actions that feel appropriate for our life, but there's the insight that arises which lead to those actions is very.
But you have no idea what we call something bad. Not to be Pollyanna about it, but that it, that a lot of turning points come at those bottoms. And of course, literally, it's true. We know that it is funny with the stock market. I find is can be very helpful, and in some ways, there's a lot of Buddhist principles
Mm,
embedded in the stock market, because when the markets go down and get near the bottom, most people are feeling more fearful, and they're just saying it's going to go down more. They're feeling more fearful. They don't recognize the impermanence of the bottom,
mm,
that the bottom is not going to last forever,
mm,
and the top won't last forever. But we forget it. At the top, we're so euphoric that we just think that people are going to be buying our services like this forever. and paying this kind of money for our services forever. We're going to keep making all this money, or the stock market's going to keep going up.
Yeah.
We don't see that enjoy it while it lasts, because it's impermanent. And
Yeah.
that's where the freedom is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's usually not when you talk to people who've had big transformations or awakenings in their life. It usually doesn't come from, yeah, I was eating this incredible chocolate ice cream cone, and then I had a second one, and it was even better the second one, and that's when I had the insight. It's not usually while we're eating ice cream. It's
Yeah.
often when things are falling
Mm.
apart, and
Mm.
we know many Buddhist books have titles like that.
Mm.
Right.
And it's the kind of thing that you wouldn't really wish on anyone, but
No,
all of us do experience those kind of moments in
that's right. Because
our
unfortunately,
life.
there's old age, sickness, and death,
Mm. Yeah.
and
Right.
right. So that's, and as so we know, and we know from our past that I think so many of us in the West, particularly, think that if I meditate, do my yoga, do my breathing practices, pay my bills on time, and if I'm kind, life will just be easy
Easy.
and happy, and there'll be no setbacks.
Yeah.
And good
Yeah.
luck with that. This idea of just getting to this perfection, but that's not what life has in store for most of us, if not
And,
all of us. Right?
and I think what I'm trying to put across in this podcast and with my book is that I think that would be a life that misses something.
Yeah.
That would be a life that's kind of like a little bit empty of those kind of understanding that the difficulty gives us the opportunity to
Yes.
see the truth.
Yes. That there's a richness and an educational opportunity when we're facing difficult people. And I think there's nothing wrong, I want to say, with just waking up, going surfing. Well, of course, there's impermanence in that, but waking up, having your perfect cup of coffee, and reading the paper, playing pickleball or whatever else one
Yeah.
might do for the rest of the day. There's nothing wrong with that life.
Mm.
But there's something about the grit of interacting with
Mm.
others, and once you start interacting with other human beings, the shit occasionally hits the fan, right?
Exactly.
Uh,
Exactly.
it's
Exactly.
inevitable
It's
that
enough.
no matter how perfect your spouse is, um, yeah, how perfect your workmates are, no matter how carefully you select these people, there's stuff will arise for
Mm.
you
Mm.
to grow from,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And relating it back to probably the first point we were saying in our talk together is that it arises from you.
Yeah,
The stuff that arises is not the problem isn't with the other person. It's something which is being, I don't know, grated on inside you, really.
yeah,
That gives us this lovely opportunity to see ourselves. Mm, exactly.
yeah. Well, this is great,
Oh.
Mark. Thank you so much
Yeah, well,
for
thank
for
you. I
this
mean,
podcast.
mm,
Yeah,
mm.
it's
It's
great.
certainly a lot to sort of stir up some bits and think about and consider how do we allow every difficult situation in our life to be something we welcome? That's a real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mm. Mm.
yeah,
Thank you so much for bringing all
yeah,
of your wisdom and your experience and those wonderful examples and your knowledge and things. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely wonderful to be here with you, and I just love that you're bringing the shadow into the light. And one could say that it's very apt that you brought me on, because money has just been in such shadow. It's so taboo. It's in the closet. You can't talk about it, and you can't talk about talk about difficult people, difficult situations, and money is one of them. To
Mm.
bring these into the light and say, let's have a new perspective on the stuff that we are avoiding, or don't
Mm.
or hope we don't have to deal with. Um,
Mm.
so I
Exactly.
think
Yeah.
there's tremendous healing by shining our mindfulness practice on our behaviors, our thoughts around money.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree.
Yeah, yeah.
If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review and a star rating on whatever platform you use. And do recommend it to others, because we all meet difficult people, and each of those meetings presents an opportunity for learning and growth. I also have a downloadable video course in how to deal with difficult people. Head over to my website for more information, markwestmaquette.co.uk. Thanks for listening.